5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Art of Move podcast with myself, Anthony Manuel, my good friend, Dr. William Raybar. We're out here in the Canadian Rockies trying to find the grand unified theory of human movement and biomechanics, and we have a very special guest today. We are joined today by David Weck, which I'm pretty sure every one of our audience members is familiar with. We've talked about David Weck's ideas like relentlessly on this podcast. We love David's work. For those of you who don't know who David is, David Weck is the inventor of the Bosu balance trainer and the founder of Weck Method. David's influence reaches millions of people across the globe, from world-class athletes to disabled individuals regaining the ability to walk. David has been helping people achieve better functional fitness for the past 30 years. Among his many inventions, David is excited to be launching ProPulse speed trainers and Soul Steps, both of which serve David's stated mission, which is making every step stronger for everyone. And I connected with David recently. We were talking, I saw one of his posts, and he was talking about the 6 lines of intent and tapping into the power and balance of big toes. And if you've been listening to our podcast for a while, we've had quite a few podcast guests, and we've talked about the structure of the foot quite a bit, where pressure off the big toe during the gait cycle isn't exactly something that is talked about favorably in some of the circles that we've talked to, some of the guests that we've had on. And I really wanted to talk to, because David and I had a really cool half-hour conversation about why you should train the big toe, having the idea of both sides of the foot utilized, and kind of talk about the biomechanical reasoning behind that. So if you've listened to a lot of our episodes, I'm really excited because David is kind of the first almost contrarian point of view. And we're, this podcast is about trying to find the truth of biomechanics, right? So let's dive into it, David. The post that I saw, you kind of gave a warning against listening to people who teach to never access the inside edge of the foot during the gait, and the sort of consequence of that is that there are now athletes who have been training that way who are experiencing catastrophic non-contact injuries, such as popped Achilles and shredding knees. Can you touch a little bit more on that?
Sure. So I think the best way to open it up is describing what my philosophy is, so people can understand from my perspective where I'm coming from. And I say the underlying philosophy of my work is both sides utilized. So I believe that you're comparing and contrasting opposites. You're competing and cooperating opposites. And a very simple distinction would just be right and left, right? So you have a right side, you have a left side, you have an upper, you have a lower. And in the case of the foot, the way that I define it, we define it here at Weck Method, is there is an outside strong section of the foot where the 4th and 5th metatarsals tie in directly to the calcaneus. And then we have what I call the long side of the foot, which is the big toe, second toe, and third toe, which have a direct tie-in to the talus floating on top of the calcaneus. So we could talk big words here because it's geeks who are listening, correct?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Absolutely. Okay, good. So we don't have to dumb this down. We can go in depth.
We have an audience of people who like the details. So let's
perfect.
Pull no punches. If we need clarification, I'll slow us down.
Okay, perfect. So now that's my perspective. It's both sides utilized. The Bosu logo actually stems from this idea that the hands, each one is an infinity as it describes the rotation of the pronation and the supination. And I've got 2 infinities that the best modality on planet Earth for organizing the spiral capacity connection to the body and coordination to the other side is a simple length of rope. And in 2004, I created something called, RMT rope, rope flow, where the big innovation was just stop jumping it. So like, okay, take a piece of rope, right? And do all you can do with it without jumping through it. Because now you got to turn right or left, and you don't have a choice. You got to do it because you're not going through on the jump. And if you hearken back to the days of the beginning, right? Sticks, stones, and rope. Those are the 3 first fundamental tools that I believe set it into motion so that we could have this conversation with the high technology of our time now, but it stems back to the first capacity. You didn't even have to fashion the tools. You just had to innovate in the application with a stick and a stone. And as soon as you bring cordage into the equation that ties it all together, you create a leverage effect where the stick becomes a bow and arrow, the stone becomes a sling. You can tie things up and carry them. So the beast that you've just slain with the stick is now carried with the rope, tying the feet to the stick. And okay, now we march it back to the campfire, right? So, or the village. So going back to these fundamental basics in the tool usage gives us a certain attenuation to a perfect path, because the rope doesn't lie to you like your enemies, your friends, your significant other, right? The person on the street. How you doing? I'm doing fine. Maybe they're not, but they're just greasing the social interaction with a white little lie that's useful, okay? So this idea of harmonizing the body using both sides, I just want to reiterate that is the foundation and the principle that I work with. It goes back to Taoism, where you fundamentally divide things into yin and yang. And the Eastern philosophy is, rather than get into this mechanistic minutia and the details, the Eastern philosophy is much more just broad stroke. Okay, what is the inherent characteristic of this, and then what is its opposite, and how do they interact together, and so goes the universe. So using that philosophy helped inform me there. And the Weck method logo, that stands for up, down, gravity, the constant, the North Star, and all around, which is this idea of rotating, okay? So now what sparked our conversation was a post that I made about just cautioning people that if you neglect the big toe, right? If you're instructed not to use it, or you're consciously thinking like, okay, it's wrong for me to load the big toe, I think that it's fundamentally wrong because it's not what happens in reality. I would say, think of a wide receiver who has to cut to his left. Where does he come off the right foot? Does he come off the right foot at an angle where he's coming off and projecting off the inside edge and the big toe? Or is he somehow like pivoting and coming off what I call a fourth toe fold, right? And the answer is obvious, a basketball crossover. I mean, come on, you can't. The problem with locomotives, if somebody tells you that locomotion is, forward locomotion, well, then they've missed the whole component of locomotion that relates to fight and not flight, okay? Multi-directional movement is more typical than straight ahead movement. And in yesteryear, when you didn't have paved streets, most of the paths involved some form of turning with a far more frequency than driving on Highway 40 across the country. Okay, so the first mistake that someone can make is to have a dogmatic approach that everything has to relate to forward locomotion, because it's unrealistic and it's not functional. If that's what you're serving, and you have some theory that everything has to relate to that, well, okay, well, what about the wide receiver who has to cut left? What about the offensive lineman who has to back up? I mean, hike, they're taking steps back. It's not a running play, it's a passing play, right? Chink, 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 you got to come back. And so there's a highly vocal, highly toxic cult that I am sorry to say, it's sort of sprung from the garden of Weck method. And it's like it's like the weed with thorns that we, oh, I'm sorry. Like, why did it have to come, right? And it boils down to, in the fitness industry, everybody needs a unique selling proposition, and we're all competing for money. And we're competing for status. We're competing for credibility. We're in a game or battle or war of ideas. is what we're in. And you're only worth what you can bring to the table in terms of your knowledge in our industry. That's all you're worth. If you don't know something, well, then you aren't worth that something. Okay? And this toxic cult has had enough time in existence now that now we can start to examine the training effects from their theories. And the offensive lineman that I'm referring to is a client trained for 2 years who popped an Achilles on a play with a non-contact injury. Now this cult, okay, and some of them are listening. Hi guys, you're all blocked on Instagram. How you doing? Hope you're doing well. I just block them because they're toxic and they engage in a bunch of nonsense to us against them, like everybody else is wrong, we're right. And basically the ringleader of this, who has now led to what I'll call the Achilles tendon, which I'll define as a ruptured Achilles tendon resulting from a non-contact injury. That's what I would call an Achilles tendon. And I can feel the blood pressure rising. Some of the listeners, hi, how you doing? Keep on listening, because we'll come around. So an offensive lineman trained for 2 years from this group, right at the central headquarters, has just ruptured an Achilles from a non-contact injury. And this is the cult, mind you, that says their mission, their stated mission, mine is every step stronger for everyone. Their stated mission is to save the world's connective tissue, I believe. Okay. I don't pay attention to them anymore. What I get from them is like what people send me, and like woke movement coaches. There's a Instagram page called Woke Movement Coaches. It's a fantastic page because, hypocrisy is just laid out for you. There's also one called Clowns with a bunch of underscores.
I've seen it.
And yeah. You can see these things, and it's quite damning what you'll see when the founder of the cult is running and doing exactly opposite what you're supposed to code into a body. It's not a good indication of efficacy. Okay, and there's a drill that I'll see or have seen people do where you lunge forward with one foot and then you pivot the back foot, and you lunge forward and pivot the back foot. Now that is biomechanically related to fight, because pivoting the back foot actually spirals your center of mass backward. Okay, it spirals you backward, and it would be used if I jab and then I cross. The pivot on the back foot that pivot on the back foot is going to help me coil to set up an uppercut, to move my body, or hit a hook, right? Just basically speaking. Now, this doesn't mean that could it potentially be a useful drill for locomotives, but then we have to looking at, okay, the fundamental biomechanics of locomotion is you want to be on the front side of the gate if you're trying to go fast. You don't want to be back, because that means you're not moving. If your feet are way back there and they're staying way back there, and it costs more time to cross the knees and get the other foot in front of the other foot, well, then you're slower and you put more stress on the hamstrings, and all sorts of problems arise when you have backside mechanics. And everybody's known this for a long time. So a drill that can only be consciously competent, right? Because it doesn't happen in reality. And if you watch anybody fast, like I'm talking fast, they land with their foot turned out. They will tend to initiate with the green dot, and we'll talk about the green dot, because the green dot is the foundation of this cult. And the green dot was defined and coined by yours truly. And the cult stole my diagram, copyright infringement, and took this posture, which you don't understand, and put it here like this. Okay. The reason why I haven't, got the lawyers to take it down is because it's the ultimate humiliation that, they attack me so incessantly and lie about me and slander me and do all this stuff, because the ringleader of it, what he does in his interpersonal relationships is he bullies people by making them feel stupid. Like, coming at them with, oh, you don't understand. This is, this is nature. Like this is, this is proportion. This is, blah, blah, blah. And some people have an insecurity of they don't want to feel stupid and they don't have enough, I guess, wherewithal to stand up. And, so what they do is they become a true believer because that's the path to acceptance from the leader. So you don't feel stupid. And that leads to either a break entirely, which is ultimately what will happen with everybody, or a true believer bent on this is the answer, us against them, we're right, everybody else is wrong. But then if you start to dig into it and you see sort of like the selective editing to prove a point, it's very easy to unmask the deception and the dishonesty. And this harkens back to money. So the founder of this cult came out to study privately with me, I think it was 2016, and 3 days of intensive, paid for the service. And when you come study with me, I'm trying to give you everything that I know, everything that I know. And I showed him prototypes for what was called a Weck deck, this working project that I'd been working on for more than a decade. And I think I showed him like 3 different prototypes, all right? And now as I relate back, I remember something that he said that was sort of like a red flag that I didn't see. I'm not that good at judging people. I tend to give people the benefit of the doubt, and then they, will tend to disappoint because I just, I don't see it until it hits me. So I remember it was, Dave, I'm here for the money. How do I get a piece of the action? Dave, can I invest in your company? I want a piece of this action. Can I invest in your company? Well, no, I'm a family business. You can't invest in the company. There's nothing like that. And so that turned into, hey, I have an invention and I want you to license it. So, you sell it, you pay me a royalty. And the invention was a slant board. And the invention was like miniature slant boards that you put under your heel. So it's not an invention. There's no way for me to sell that. And it was this idea that, oh, you showed me a slant board, and now suddenly I've stolen your idea from my creation called the Soul Steps. And the Soul Steps are multiplanar. It's a complex angle that relates to the foot as I understand it biomechanically. I don't poo-poo cadaver science. I think cadaver science, I wouldn't know what I know without cadaver science. I would have no way. Leonardo da Vinci couldn't have been Leonardo. Michelangelo couldn't have been Michelangelo had they not dug up graves and studied the cadaver science, right? So the poo-poo cadaver science that's just stupid. You're shooting holes in your own boat, right? And you have minions who go plug the holes because they're too scared to feel stupid. And you've corralled them around your little sphere of influence, and now they're your true believers, and you've got troops. He called them I think he called them the hive. How he was going to unleash the hive against me. Okay. So these are little petty things in the fitness industry. And I think now this opportunity to just share the truth is, you can listen to their side, listen to my side, see what you believe. I don't care. Right. And with regard to some of the things that they do are excellent. So, okay, great. Helpful for some, harmful for others is not a good formula. I wouldn't want that to be sort of, the results that I do. Do no harm is my first mantra. So what happened was somebody sent me a video of, and the woke movement coaches put it up, where there was an offensive lineman who had a non-contact Achilles injury, full rupture. And it was the partner of the founder who was talking. Self-admittedly stupid. Okay, he'll be the first to tell you how dumb he is. Okay, and he's correct. So he was saying on this clip that I saw on Woke Movement Coaches that, for 2 years, I was training this guy, and gave him 2 years in the league, and then his on a bum Achilles, and then until finally his Achilles gave out or his Achilles popped. Okay, so this guy had Achilles injury in college, but it was the fresh Achilles, the uninjured Achilles that popped. And it was a non-contact injury. So suddenly you have the most damning event that could possibly happen to a cult that is saying that they're here to rescue connective tissue. And then if you look at it logically, say, all right, well, I'm giving this guy 2 years of training, and I'm instructing him never use the big toe. I'm instructing him always rotate, despite the fact that he has to go backward on half the plays, right? If it's a passing play, he's not running forward. So he has to go backward. And backward, I can tell you right now, you don't pivot in to go backward as an offensive lineman. You need a base that's substantial where the back foot's turned out. Otherwise, you're getting trampled. Now, as a defensive back, when I backpedal, that is actually pigeon-toed because it allows me to turn without being too open in the hip. So if I'm here, I have power in the turn, and I can turn the other way. But if I'm here backpedaling, I don't have that opportunity. So it's biomechanically incorrect for a defensive back to put the toes out and backpedal. And so this liberal use of the word technology is another thing that, you know, pigeon-toed is somehow forward technology. And I would argue that, well, no, it's actually not forward technology. It's backward technology if you need to go backward with the potential to go either side, right? And you're feeling it right now, Anthony, right? Mm-hmm. And if you look at the people who are fast, okay, they're landing green dot, 4th and 5th metatarsal, they're coming through, it's turned out, and then there's various recovery strategies. There's not just one recovery strategy where, you know, you're going to flick your heel out. That's not the only one. And if we look at Johan Blake, for example, or Tyson Gay, for example, they are tied for second fastest time in the history of humanity as we know it, okay? Neither one of them does this action. Neither one of them does that action. Okay, we'll just selectively edit that out. Okay. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to share my screen, and I want to show everybody who's watching and not just listening, and I'm sure they could perhaps come back, and I want to show you this offensive lineman, no names. I just want to show you this offensive lineman, and I want you to see the injury as it happens in a non-contact way, and just know that he was instructed in this methodology intensely for 2 years.
All right, let's pull it up.
Yeah. So while David's pulling that up, I'd like to remind the audience that we record these live on nofilter.net. If you want to see the video replay and you're listening on iTunes or Spotify, you can go to nofilter.net and go to my vaults, and you can watch the video replay where you can see the video that David is pulling up now.
Okay, so this ain't my client. This is their client. So you're going to see him. Boom. He's the guard right there who's coming back. His left foot is turned out. Left foot turned out because it has no choice. And then, boom. No contact. Wants to go forward. Pop. You can see the pain. You can see the limp. And now you can see the fall. Boom. All right. So now let's watch it again.
Is there a close-up on that?
No, there's not a close-up on it. I hope you can see it.
Yeah, I can.
It's my entire screen, and I have a post on Instagram if anyone wants to go see it. But what I'd like you to pay attention to now is not the unfortunate person who may have had a career-ending injury, you know, and what factors contributed, you know, can't say for sure, but everybody's free to make their own opinion. Look at the feet of the other players now. Watch how that running back just had the inside edge because look at the running back. What toe did he come off right there? Look at the running back. Is he on the inside or the outside? Is he on the inside or the outside? He's on the inside because he's got to go to his right. Boom. Now, if you watch the other players, boom, the defensive guy, he's got to turn around. Watch one number 95. Watch him. Boom, inside edge on an angle, inside edge on an angle. So now I'll come back to not sharing the screen because we've seen it.
Okay, can I push back on a couple of those ideas just because
Please do. I've been talking the whole time. Push back as much as we can. Let's get to the bottom of it.
Okay, great. There's actually a lot to uncover there, right? So what you just showed, everything you analyzed there was correct, right? But I would say that the system that you were speaking of would say that the inside edge is what's to be avoided, not that people aren't on the inside edge. Inside edge happens all the time. They're saying stay off the inside edge, and you won't, like, the injury that you showed was clearly on the inside edge, right? Like he was pushing off the inside edge.
No.
He was pushing off the outside edge there.
No. I think you have to reframe it to say, let's unpack this first idea that you're supposed to avoid the inside edge. Okay, let's unpack that one.
Yeah, because that's
Right?
biomechanically what I kind of intended
Well,
to start the
and William,
exploration of.
tell me what
let
you're
me
thinking.
let me finish the point there. They were saying you can't find a shred where the person's inside ankle bone is high, and that would be on the outside edge of the foot. Now that video, I don't think that's why I wanted a close up and a slow mo to see what was actually happening, because it's very hard to see, right? But I'm just saying that is their statement, is that you can't find me a film of inside ankle bone high. Not that they don't train, because they don't train inside edge. They train outside edge, and doesn't mean that you won't go inside edge while you're playing, right? It's just it takes years and years and years. For me, personally, I did years of inside edge training, big toe training. I subscribed to the Gate guys, doing all those big toe exercises. I was also injured on the lateral part of my fibular head. So my foot collapsed in on the inside. When I learned to climb my foot, and this just may have been my cue, but when I learned to climb my foot, I started getting power out of that foot. So going off the outside edge was more powerful for me. And another thing he said with the boxing and the moving laterally, I push off the fourth and fifth, and I can rotate out of there without touching my big toe. Like I can show you how I do that if you really want. But the point being, it's possible to do. And I would argue that it's harder to control going towards your big toe as you're pushing laterally than just cueing yourself to inside ankle bone high and pushing off the fourth and fifth. What do you think about that?
Well, let me just first say that go watch the Odell Beckham Jr. Injury with his knee when he first tears the ACL. Yeah. Watch that video and watch it closely, because
let's pull it up.
Okay, great.
I'm trying to find it right now.
All right, and you got to watch it in slow. But here's what I'm going to tell you about that. I would not call that a non-contact injury, because he's putting on the brakes so abruptly, and he may or may not have actually hit the foot of the other guy. So I think some people would try to, use that as an argument that, hey, it wasn't hit on the knee. But no. I'm going to call that not a non-contact. That was a football injury. But if you look at that and watch his ankle, he goes, boom, to the outside. So it's not a case of this, inside. I'm not even going to say the phrase, because it's so, to me, it's just, it's marketing. And here's what I would say. Are you familiar with the mechanics of a basketball crossover?
Fairly familiar. Yeah, I played basketball and I watched a lot. Yeah.
Okay, so a basketball crossover, Allen Iverson, Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant. Kobe Bryant did an interesting technique, because the weight coming out of the foot to the backside of that first move, there's not the weight in that. And what guys will do is they'll actually put their foot flat and create like a drag pull to get back to the other side with literally like the side of their foot. So, the inside of their ankle bone is like touching the floor for that moment when it's unweighted, to give them a competitive advantage to get back the other way, right? And I'm not arguing whether it's good or bad. I'm just arguing that it is happening, and it's impossible to do that move from the fourth and fifth metatarsals, okay? Because I can't pivot and face that way if I've got to go that way fast. So if you look at that movement, then yeah, here we go. So
is this it?
Yeah, this is it. Number 13, his left leg. So right there, boom, inside of the ankle goes high. Okay, so there's your first example of a torn connective tissue where it wasn't because the ankle bone went low. Okay, because we can selectively edit anything we want. That is high. Okay, that's exactly where they tell you got to be, pigeon-toed and high. Okay, and anybody's free to interpret this, and anybody's free to disagree, and depending upon the level of indoctrination, you have different interpretations. But I care about the truth.
Sure. I mean, we can let people judge for themselves here, like what they've
Everybody
seen.
should judge for themselves. I encourage people to study everything, absorb what's useful, and discard the rest. What I'm doing is I'm finally speaking out on the vicious lies and slander and nonsense that this hive of cult members organized around this, I, I don't know, charlatan.
So, Anthony, can you pull that back up? Sorry about that. Can you
Sure.
pull that back
Yeah,
up?
of
I just
course.
have a
Yeah.
question in particular to that.
Yeah, and then what I'd love to do from there is I'd love to go and kind of go over how you think the foot actually does behave biomechanically in gait, and what the role of the big toe, because we had a very, very interesting conversation over the phone
Yes.
So,
about the actual.
I to push back a little bit. I'm not saying you're wrong here. And it's kind of hard to see if it's not full slow motion. But are you saying that the pressure was pushed off the outside edge before? Or where was the major pressure point? I think that's what they usually say. Where are you pushing power out of? So is
watch
this
it.
the
Watch
outside
it.
edge that he's pushing power?
No, watch.
Look at the landing.
He
Yeah, I'm
lands
watching.
on the inside of the heel.
Yeah,
Okay.
inside edge right there. Yeah.
Okay.
But then the ankle climbs,
Okay.
right?
But the ankle collapses, and that's what, or not collapses, but the ankle turns over to high, and that's where the injury happens.
So it
Yeah, so
lands
he-
low.
I mean,
And
you
he
can see
comes
the,
out to the outside edge.
the force doesn't abruptly stop the knee until his ankle is higher on the inside. So, and whatever semantics.
Yeah.
And even, okay, fine, you're right. That's an inside edge injury. Okay, I'm wrong. Let people.
No, I'm
decide
not
for
saying that. I
themselves.
was just trying to actually see what was happening there, right? 'Cause
Look,
it's not
listen.
full slow
There's
motion.
going to be a lot of people defending this until they come to their senses. Okay, that's just the reality of the situation.
Okay,
We're
so
dealing with dishonesty and just toxicity that is
Right. So let's I'm gonna stop sharing my screen here. And what I'd love to talk about is some of the biomechanical nuance of how
You know
the
what I'd
foot-
like you to do? Like Anthony, call up Eliud Kipchoge, see if you can get some footage of him, okay? Because he's an athlete who's supposedly, I think according to them, is the greatest athlete of all time. I think. You might know better than me, but Eliud Kipchoge, the world's greatest marathoner ever, world record holder, who had a robust career with no injuries. Okay, the guy was one of the most durable marathoners in the history of the marathon. Okay, and what you're going to look at is, from the behind the keyboard in your chair, I know what's best. You're going to see complete collapse of his foot. It's going to look like, oh, he's going to break that. He's going to tear everything. He comes right off the big toe. But he lands on the outside, and he transitions, and he goes way inside. So we can selectively edit and find like one clip where his ankle is higher than his, whatever. But if you watch the video and you're honest, you will see an activity. Okay, look at that. Come on.
yeah, we've definitely talked about this on the show before. But
Okay, well, I mean, we can see it now, and if somebody can't see this, well, okay, 2 + 2 is 5. Good.
yeah,
So,
I think
look. It's turned out.
Yeah.
He hits on the outside, and it goes way inside. Now watch this one where you get the angle where you'll be able to see it. The best angle, of course, is from behind. So that's, if you can find one of behind, that would be even better. But if you watch his left foot here, you're going to see what most people involved in biomechanics would say that's absolutely wrong. We need to fix him. Boom. That's going to be called collapse from the majority of people who will have an opinion. Most people will say this is a very boring subject, and I'd rather go watch my grass grow. So
that's why I say we're like the most
so-
niche podcast ever. We're literally just looking at people's feet as they run.
Okay,
But this is what
that's Eliud Kipchoge. He's the greatest marathoner of all time. If you watch from the back, it'll be much more severe what you will see. Now, you can go watch Usain Bolt, and especially coming around the turn, the inside of his ankle goes lower than the outside as he comes, and those forces are 6-7 times his body weight, whatever. So again, this idea that there's wishful thinking, there's reality. So if if you watch a wide receiver and you think that he has the time to come off the out, there's no angle in the shin. You come off the outside of your foot if I try to go left and I'm talking about performance, William. I'm not talking about health even. I'm talking about performance. And we all know that, we don't all know, but if you should know that, there you go. That performance and health, there's a nexus point, and then they diverge. So if you want to be the best in the world, okay, so a lot of these guys, you can see all of them essentially going, those Nike sneakers actually encourage it because it gives you an acceleration angle coming off that big toe, or coming off the big toe with that quote unquote. Oh God, look at the white guy in the front.
Do you think that they're using this as almost an elastic recoil? They've made their ligaments elastic in that way, and they're bouncing off that elasticity.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah.
They are running faster as a result of this. Now, again, let's just put health and longevity on the shelf, right? So we don't need to talk about that. We're talking about reality. To be a competitive athlete who is the greatest of all time, okay? So whether this cult calls him the greatest of all time or the worst of all time, regardless, it does not matter. He's the greatest of all time. I go by results. I don't go by I don't care what your inputs are. If you win, you win. If you lose, you lose. And that's just cut and dry.
But what about health? Would he be able to run that way barefoot without the Nike Vaporflies?
He wouldn't run as fast because the Nike Vaporflies are very fast. I've tried them, and they're very fast. And there's the barefoot mechanic will naturally change itself. And what I would even say about barefoot mechanics are the proprioception of the barefoot is way different than a proprioception of a barefoot in a barefoot shoe. Because picture you're, it's an evening and it's going well, right? You get into the bedroom, you put on the rubber sheath or not, right? And if you have a lambskin, it's because you want to feel more. Now put the tread of a Vivo barefoot around your special purpose and tell me, what can you feel? Can't feel nothing, right? So your foot in a barefoot shoe will actually get injured if you don't know the mechanics far easier than if you kept your padded sneakers on. So the best way to onboard barefoot is to find a very safe surface where you can do it barefoot for real, so that your body learns how to do it for real, and then you put it in the shoe and see if you can do it for real, right? You won't get it for real to the extent you will if you're actually barefoot. Okay, so boom. Okay, the inside of the heel went low.
Yeah, this is a Tara runner, right? So this is
right. And you watch them. This
is the running tribe, right?
Okay, right. And they don't flick their ankles out. Okay, so they're the worst of all time. And this is, again, this is the worst and the connective tissue of the world. And okay, whatever. This lady's running, 150 miles or something. Yeah. Probably doesn't stretch. Probably doesn't foam roll, right?
She won a 50K wearing these sandals and a skirt.
So let's unpack what's actually happening. Okay, so we agree the green dot is the fourth and fifth, right? The base of the fourth and fifth.
The green dot is basically the heel leveraged as far forward as possible to have a substantial skeleton. So here she's actually rolling through. Yeah, so she's rolling through an outside heel strike, which at a certain pace is more efficient than if you're going to go a long distance, this is far more efficient than trying to land on your toes, right? So, and that's because you're using the skeleton. I firmly believe that it's the nervous system, the fascial system, which is nervous system. That's where the housing of it is. And so it's the fascial system and the skeletal system are the priorities. And the skeleton is number one, because the skeleton is not right. You're not going to do well. So go ahead.
Okay, so you're landing on the green dot, and the weight and the power is rolling in, and you're saying that the big toe is where the power exits. And I'm trying to interpret what you're saying here.
Yeah, it's sequences. Yes, especially if the foot is turned out, which it is.
Yeah.
So it goes here, and then it sequences and comes off the big toe. So it's a sequence. And
so how much power is off the big toe? How much power is off the big toe? So you land on the fourth and fifth, but you're rolling into the big toe. So is it 100? Okay, go for it.
So basically, the big toe has, if you're just counting toes individually, the big toe has the most power. Okay. And there's a massive long ligament of the flexor hallucis longus that comes and it ties into the very tip of that big toe. And that tendon supports the inner ankle because it goes from the tip of the, there you go. You see how it comes there to the tip of the toe, and then it comes, and there's other angles that really shows the support it gives to the inside of your foot. The next one. Well, and I have another post with different angle as well. But the whole muscle is a tendon. Like and it comes from the outside. The fibula wraps under the inside of the ankle to give it stability, and it goes to the tip of the big toe. So, and I believe that the body's a pressure system. And if you have something that is superficial, what you need is the stuff inside it to provide pressure so that it has something to work off of. You think of breath, that's the principle of pressurization. And yeah, so that one, go back to that one. The last one.
This one here?
Yeah. So you literally see how there's that sort of like, what we'll call not 90 degree, but there's a degree angle and turn right at the ankle there. And there's a little protuberance on the calcaneus that tendon goes underneath, and it acts as a suspensional support. Okay. So if you neglect the big toe, you will not be developing the tendon that is supporting the inside ankle, because the strong side of the foot makes that initial contact, and then the angle is achieved and the projection angle is achieved as the body is coming. You hit maximum weight, and after maximum weight, after maximum load, it goes to the big toe. And then the big toe is this long, strong, and it flicks. So if I'm passing a basketball, it goes from the outside to the inside, and there's a flick. And the flick, you cannot ignore the flick. Try passing a basketball and don't flick, right? Try jumping up and don't flick. Try sprinting and don't flick.
So in the gait, are like the strong side of the foot, we're still talking about that bony bridge on the outside, and that's the most structurally stable part of the foot. You still think basically you're landing there, and then you're absorbing force, transitioning to the long side of the foot, and you're almost saying it's like that strong side of the foot takes the impact, and then you're transitioning that force into the long side.
No, let me interrupt.
Okay. Yep.
You're not the whole thing is a transition. Okay, the whole thing is a transition. So at no point is there a hot spot in terms of, the green dot smashes down, absorbs everything, and then goes. Right. No, it's a sequence in transition. So that is basically the sequence in transition is the lateral to medial, the outside strong to the inside long. We call it the green side of the foot's the outside, the blue side is the inside. That's how we define it. And it's the go and then the go to. And that is, if you're honest and you study it, this is how it actually works. And if you're misinformed, it works however you want it to work in your mind. And we can unpack it and unpack it and unpack it. And I'm not saying that everything that this cult does is bad. They do a lot of good stuff, a lot of great stuff. And it's helpful for some. No question about it. Absorb what's useful and discard the rest. All I'm saying is if you make your bed, you got to lie in it. And if you're telling me that you never hit the big toe and the big toe is somehow verboten, forbid, and I train you to do that, and then in the sport, you actually got to use it, well, you haven't trained it. And all you've done is train the outside. So you want to talk about a muscular imbalance, go to the picture of the calves there. The gastroc got an outside head and an inside head, right? I mean, if I never address the inside head, that's the bigger part of the muscle. The lateral is the smaller muscle and more tendon, and the inside is more muscle, just a little bit less tendon. Depends on the person. Michael Jordan's would be like way up close to the knee because the more tendinous you are, the more springy you are. And the big Nordic, Viking with gigantic calves, well, he's not as fast, right? He just doesn't have the tendons, and there's a lot of weight at the distal. He's got to move.
Well, that's why we're doing the show. We're unpacking the ideas, right? So, Anthony,
absolutely.
Can you go back to the foot? I just want to, with the,
this one?
Yes, right there. Yeah. So you're landing on the fourth and fifth, and there's the transition. However, there's the sesamoid bones under that big toe, the first big toe. So you're saying you're bypassing that and going straight to the end of the big toe to push the power off of, or do you hit the sesamoid bone?
Well, no. What I'm saying is that the ideal sequencing would be to utilize the sesamoids like they're track blocks. So you don't want to be over pressurizing behind the sesamoids. What you want to be doing is, as that weight transitions, you're just forward of those sesamoids, and that gives you extra sort of leverage to use the tendon to come off. So I'm not like rolling over the sesamoid. I'm sequencing, so I'm boom, boom, boom. And what you'll see is a lot of athletes with sort of that bunion toe. You know, the big toe is like way bent in. So, and essentially that is, it's allowing them to create an even greater angle without like bunching up with the big toe. And soccer players, you need cleats that are like tight. Right? You just can't play the game with like big barefoot shoes that makes you look like an aboriginal. It's not the right equipment. In the same way that skis, you can't do that in moccasins. You need a ski boot that locomotion-wise, ski boots are horrible, right?
Yeah.
I mean, when you're in the lodge, drinking your hot cocoa, I mean, clunk, 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 right? So you have performance and you have health and you have the specificity of the performance. And a lot of extra material here is just an opportunity to get caught up and trip you or hurt you or whatever.
So in terms of cueing, or in terms of, so I'm a chiropractor and I test people's big toes all the time. And basically almost nobody has that big toe extension. It's very rare to have that very end to be nice and free. So the question really is, it's like, how do you control that? How do you land on the fourth and fifth and make sure you don't hit those sesamoids and go straight off the big toe? Because it seems to me like with what I've been feeling, when I try to push off even like the third metatarsal, I find it easier for me to control when I'm cutting laterally. And I do this all the time, boxing and things like that, where I'm pushing off that outside edge and not thinking about the inside edge. And it's working out better for me. What would you say about that?
Well, I would say keep doing whatever works best for you. I mean, absolutely, no question about it. State the first part of that, what you said just a second ago.
So like the green dot, it's coming in, and the fact that I see in clinic that like I can't really take someone's big toe and extend it, which is where they would be in the gait cycle, right? And have that be the perfect exit point. To me, it's harder to control that. Like when I'm thinking my own movement, harder to control that push towards the midline than if I just thinking this may just be an internal cue that I push farther out, right? So
what I would say is that I engage in a technique called the fourth toe fold. Okay, and what the fourth toe fold does is it allows you to learn how to advance the transition more forward, so that as it's a lot easier to do fourth toe fold walking. But if you want to go your absolute fastest, you won't be fourth toe folding at that initiation. But the exercise of having gone through the fourth toe fold gives your body that experience that it's much more comfortable on sort of the heads of the metatarsals, and you're not trapped behind yourself. You're sort of creating more advantageous leverage. And because if you watch basketball players especially, right, the vertical jump is higher for most athletes when they have what the exercise guy is going to say, oh, they went valgus. What happens is, and the Chinese weightlifters, when they go down in the squat, the way they get out of it is what they're doing is they're buying themselves a distance, because by dipping into it, and it's structurally sound, depending upon where your knee is and where the rest of your upper body is, right? And that gives you a centerline strength that, boom, now you can come to the outside and you can flick from the inside. And what I would say about the feet is this. Unless the upper body is correct, the feet can do nothing to save you, right? So if the upper body is correct, a lot of these mechanics literally just miraculously tend to fix themselves, right? And the cue that I use, which is, I think it's the simplest way to do it, which I'm interested in efficacy, is head over foot, right? Head over foot. And it's interesting that the number one success story from these guys was their first client who made it to the NFL, a wonderful human being. And the instruction that got him there, and I know because I was on video helping instruct, was green dot, head over foot, pulse the arms, down, pulse the arms, right? And that got him in the NFL. I think he was a bubble player. I don't know how long he lasted, but, it's interesting that the nomenclature changed as the relationship changed. One from like, license my thing. No, I'm not going to license. Oh, you stole my idea. And suddenly it became this competitive thing where it's like, okay, I'm just getting like, this is like a case where you taught the dog a trick and now he's biting your ankle. It's like, what the fuck are you doing? Right? So anyway, that's why I say upper body has to be correct.
And I really like that idea too, because nothing really happens in isolation. That's an idea that we keep coming back to throughout the podcast. And we might look at an aspect of the gait cycle, but the reality is we just recently had an episode that was a debate about whether or not the spine was the primary driver of locomotion. And the only conclusion I think that actually came out of it is that the spine does move during locomotion, but whether or not it's like the initiator of forward movement was yet to be determined, right? And we wanted to kind of unpack some of those ideas too. But if you are looking at it, basically all to say, there's nothing that happens in isolation that's going to fix the entire system, right? You might look at the foot and be like, okay, there's some stuff that's obviously wrong with the foot. We need to fix it. But you might work something up the chain and that fixes most of the problems because the body's a whole system. You're not looking at one aspect of the body to fix everything. That said, do you think that there is an optimal way to train and cue the foot during the during the gait cycle? And does that change depending on the context? If so, how?
Great questions. What I would say is that the upper body is going to set the opportunity for the feet to play the game with the rest of your body to maximum advantage, performance and health, right? Try to hit a nexus and then keep the nexus point as long as you can before you may have to, sort of disparate between performance and health. So the foot, what I would say is that you're going to do various drills and exercises specifically for the foot, one of which would be to fourth toe fold and really develop that ability to create that outward with the knees and boom, get to that outside fourth and fifth metatarsal. Because you have to remember that when you are on the inside edge as a receiver to go that way, the other foot is on the outside edge. So having the ownership of the outside edge for that cut is it's very, very important compared to what the other foot is doing. So you're sort of getting this opposite effect to go that way and then opposite effect to go that way because everything is about angles. And then I think just in terms of like trying to dig deeper into understanding of what drives the locomotion, I think if you look at the nervous system and sort of think of the body as the root structure for the brain, and the nerves almost being like a man-of-war jellyfish type thing, right? The roots are the nerves because they just feed information up to the brain, and the brain is really what matters the most, right? Everything is feeding the brain. So the idea that I'm going to like insist upon a certain shape, position, transition of the foot could be viewed as the tail wagging the dog. So if you think of the nerve signal that gets to your fingers, that's cervical. And it's not a lot of distance from the brain. But if you're thinking about your toes, well, now you're talking about like sacral innervation, low back innervation, and it's just more time. So your hand, and in locomotion, they tend to say like the hands are going to set the pace, right? You're only going to be as fast as your hands can productively move. It's not about your feet turning it over, it's your hands, and then the gearing will take care of itself. Now, one of the problems could be a lack of integrity between the hands and feet so that the hands can go fast and the feet can't catch up. That's certainly, a deficiency where you'd want to train them together and train them individually. So you're fortifying, again, both sides utilized. Train it systemically, then, isolate the weak points and try to make them strong in a manner that's going to serve the whole. So in terms of what's driving the locomotion, I think it's the intent that's driving the locomotion. And the very first move of the locomotive function, if you're standing 50-50, the very first move has to be to differentiate the feet. So when you're in the middle, you're sort of stuck and you have to move before you move unless you're going up and down, right? So in order to move laterally in any direction, let's just, for the purpose of this conversation, let's say locomotion is more than just forward, okay? Like forward locomotion, forward. Okay, God damn it, how the hell am I going to get a beer out the fridge if I can't, I'm not going forward a lot of the time. Cook a meal and tell me how many steps were forward locomotion versus like some form of twist and move and, just functional. The feet support and transport. And we want the whole kit and caboodle. We don't just want forward, right? We want the whole thing. So the intent is what's going to drive it. And there has to be some lateral shift of weight that doesn't, if you're going to do it most efficiently, that doesn't deviate my center of mass to the side, but it gets me to the side. And that's the head over foot and the Rakovetsky spinal engine with the coil, where the shoulder will come down and back, the hip will come up and forward, and that gives me the weight. And then the upper body will do that figure eight. And then my head is there at the landing. It's not there catching up. No, the head goes there. The head's there first, and then boom, the foot is underneath to support it and transport it to the other side. So if I want to go straight forward, I want my center of mass to go straight forward. I don't want to be zigzagging down the track because that's like, okay, physics, that wouldn't make much sense. So it's that coiling effect, but I can't tell you like a locus in the body of like what is driving that other than it's the intent to go forward, right? I'm going there and my body's going to do what it needs to do if I know what I'm doing and I'm capable of being most efficient. That's essentially how it works, is the head goes over to the foot, and then it goes over to the foot, and you get this spiral dynamic. And if you do it and exaggerate it, you wouldn't even need legs to be capable of ambulating with like 1 foot at a time. And it's interesting because we've all seen, anybody listen to this podcast, if you haven't seen, shame on you, but we've all seen the Rakovetsky, man with no arms and no legs, and he's walking. Right? Upright.
We pulled it up a couple episodes ago.
Yeah, I'm sure you did, right? So because it's, it's like a great example. Now, what's interesting about that, okay, is if you watch it closely, he's not doing underhand figure eights. He's doing overhand figure eights, right?
Yeah.
So it's much more akin to the crawling pattern for humans because a lion does underhand figure eights to crawl, to walk on four, but the human will tend to do overhand figure eights. And what's interesting about the gearing of the body is an overhand figure eight will correspond to an overhand figure eight in the hips, as will an underhand figure eight. It will still give you the same effect in the hips. All right. So what a miracle. So that crawling pattern, right, which is what these guys base things on. And I don't think there's anything wrong about that. I think that's good. But there's a technique that you can use called scissoring, where on a scissor, what you'll do is you'll get the maximum projection out of each side by bringing that shoulder very forward. We call it weaponization. So if I come here and I fold, I don't know if you can even see me, if I fold into this hip and I bring this shoulder forward, that lets me project longer off that foot on the backside. And it also is conducive to that heel coming out, right? So you'll see it's not just spinal anterior. If I do it overhand deliberately, you can really feel like, oh shit, I was engaged in a productive drive this whole time and I went further. And I think that that's what they're trying to accomplish because of the connection to crawling, to locomotion. I don't think they have a full grasp on what it is, because I don't think you would have people pivot the back foot. And I think that's only capable of doing consciously and the subconscious competence that doesn't happen in locomotion. So especially if you're trying to go fast. So it sort of puts you in a no man's land where if I'm training consciously, like and religiously confident, like, okay, I got to do this. And some of these guys, Jesus Christ, like, holy shit. Like, I mean, what the fuck are you doing? I mean, it looks funny if you do it to exaggeration, which some of them do, I've seen. So I think what you're doing is you're trying to set a motor pattern. You're practicing a motor pattern that won't actually happen in reality. So not only are you wasting the time, is the time now being used counterproductively because you're doing something that cannot be done or will not be done? And is there just that micro hesitation of the nervous system to be like, okay, I'm trying to think, I'm aware, I'm not aware. Like the sequencing is down to thousandths of a second to be successful in movement, right? You're not going to hit a baseball over the fence unless you're in the tens of thousands of precision and accuracy, right? And so the more accurate you can be, and subconsciously, the only way you can be that accurately in that transition of where and when is subconsciously, because thought happens way slower than that. So any kind of conscious control of an athletic movement, you're doomed to poorer performance than if you had mechanized it into muscle memory, that your body knows it. And now I'm focused on a singular cue that sets the cascade into motion. I'm not like moment to moment thinking like, okay, did it turn out enough or those kind of things.
And right? You're talking head over foot right now, or you're talking?
I'm talking globally.
Singular cue.
No. Well, that could be one, but I think head over foot is a cue that you just do it enough times, you don't need the cue anymore. Your body does it, and it feels and recognizes that it's more efficient, and you clock a faster time, which is, of course, is big incentive. So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like I'm in the track blocks, and my cue is, right hand, or, whatever. Like I'm talking about, something that triggers the cascade.
Yeah.
And it's so simple and direct that I can replicate it time after time and get really good at it where I'm not bogging myself down with thought. That's what I'm referring to as a cue. Head over foot would not be the cue. If it is, I mean, it could be the cue if it works for you, but I wouldn't recommend that I wouldn't think that cue would be the most effective cue.
Okay, so a little story. About 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, I was doing FP and, functional patterns, and I came upon your work.
Here's another one.
You were like head over foot. And I'm like, head over foot, that doesn't make any sense. I'm bracing the core, right? Like I come from the lifting chiropractic. They were teaching, is it brace the core or is it drawing in the belly, right? That was the, argument. And that was what was in the arena, basically. So I looked at your work and I'm like, head over foot, I'm going to go try this. And when I tried it, it opened up a whole, it changed the way I viewed running, and it was a lot more fun. And that cue alone just brought me so much, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So unpacking the spinal engine, I want to know how you weckify the spinal engine. So what I mean by that is I see the hips, like in general, the hips are doing a forward fold like this, right? And
forward figure eight.
Yeah. And the figure eight going backwards in the shoulder. And then in between, because you have the side bend, there's a coil of the core and you're using the tensions there, right? The appropriate tension to snap you back in the other direction. So you're getting free energy from the movement itself. Now, I've done a lot of your courses and it's the coiling core. The lats are Bo Jackson, right? Like, how does that tie all in together? And how did you weckify the spinal engine?
Okay, so great question. So I did it with both sides utilized and identifying the polarities. And this actually stems from brachiation, because that was a locomotive function that your feet are much more designed for, a round interface to grab onto the branch or the trunk or whatever, right? Chimpanzees will think with their toes, right? I mean, humans started doing it. The chimpanzees do that with the foot, right? So their foot is a manipulating tool as much as it is a locomotive on the ground tool, right? So, and I guess the theory is we sort of evolved from that, and the structure is so similar that it sort of makes sense, right? That would be the case. The head over foot is that enlightening, okay, boom, now I'm on the mainframe, which, by the way, when the leader of this group that we were talking about earlier called me his most important mentor, put me in his book, he told me it was head over foot and green dot that had transformed his world because he had come from foundation training and Agascu training, which are principally this, sort of sagittal equivalency. I think, they obviously probably have some form of rotation, but the main tenets of that is this plumb squared neutral, right? Really get it strong that way. So what I did was I gave him that same experience of, holy shit, like, yes, I can build on this, right? And we had an alliance and sort of an agreement, like, okay, let's take on the brace your core runners, the gate guys who know nothing, okay? I've seen those guys, and he'll have a woman in a seminar, or a guy, stand 50-50 and then lift one leg without adjusting the spine or the head, and they invariably tip over. And the problem, as identified by these clowns, is your QLs are not strong enough. Yeah. It's like, oh, really? Right? And they're toxic too. But they have a big audience and blah, 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 blah. But the truth is going to come out ultimately. So I had with this cult before it turned into this thorns and prickers, we sort of had a great relationship, worked together. And I want to be friendly with people. Oh, and by the way, the FP, I'm going to tell you a funny story. And so all your listeners know the truth, because all I'm doing is I'm telling the truth according to how I understand it. Swear to God. Okay?
Let's hear it.
Okay. So I've had some interesting experiences with the Noid. Okay. Avoid the Noid. So basically, I first saw him doing this amazing jump on a Bosu ball with slow motion, great lighting and stuff. I was like, this guy's fantastic. This video has 250,000 views, and the Bosu ball is featured front and center. Right? I love this. I found out he's in San Diego. Oh, fantastic. I got a new RMT club. Let me go over there and bring it to him, and maybe he'll put it in a video to get some million views, right? I'm just thinking like, okay, this is win-win. I give you a great tool. You show it off. People buy it. We're both winning. And we had an amazing time, right? First time he texted me after, you've changed my perspective. The RMT club opened up and revealed this new thing and blah, blah, blah. Because I think it was also that non-dominant side, compare and contrast principle. And most people can do it well here, but right? Don't know it on the non-dominant side. So I was very quickly able to ratchet that up. Now, I think it was interesting because I tried to show him and his group there the ropes. And I think that's when it became like, oh, okay, well, no, not interested in the ropes right now. Okay, thanks, because I don't think he wanted to divert it into my session. I think it was his session, right, as it was. So things go on, and suddenly I get this message, F you motherfucker, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, what the hell happened? And what had happened was one of the interns in our office said, like in one of his posts, like, oh, that's the Weck Method RMT Club. And apparently that was, crossed the line that, okay, we commented about our thing. And so I was just like, this guy is like fucking crazy. And then one night I just decided to fuck with him. So I sent him a picture of himself running on his treadmill with his head in the middle on the right foot and his head in the middle on the left foot. And I'm like, hey, how you doing? Hope all's well. Hey, here's a little tip. It's going to make everything you do better. It's called head over foot. Send. 3 dots immediately. You motherfucker, I'm going to get my lawyers like, bah, 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 bah. And I'm just like, calm down, please calm down. Like, whoa. And now, how's he run? Oh! If you did it your way and I told you how to do it and you do it my way, who's your daddy? Okay.
Yeah.
And I do that because he's so toxic too. I mean, it's just this toxicity. Both of these guys, the cult and FP, they attack Ben Patrick knees over toes guy. Literally attack him with relentless just vitriol that is shameful. And I think Ben Patrick, like, if you had 26 inches of vertical leap at the age of 22 and you're now chipping your teeth on the hoop, we need to explore everything that you're doing and figure out how the hell did you do that? Because that may just be the greatest athletic transformation in the history of humanity as we know it. Vertical leap is so precious and so hard to gain. And unless you're 14 and now you're 18, well, oh, yeah, he gained 19 inches. No, this is a grown man. And his training is brilliant. The consistency and the attack. I'm just fighting for what's right now. I'm just telling people like it is, so that people who listen to this, hopefully you come to your senses, and if not, maybe later you will.
To push back a little bit on that, I don't see head over foot from knees over toes guy either. I've never seen
Well, now you do. Now you do, since I went up and ran with him up in LA, and he was grateful as can be. And I recently taught him how to add the coil to his dunk, because he'll be the first to tell you that he dunks with incredible spring, not with technique. And he sees the other guys coming in and like, boom. And now, because we taught him the coil, very simple, and the concept head over foot, he was in my facility jumping 54 inches onto a pad where he's coming in, hitting that, and creating this launch as opposed to coming in this launch here. So look at it, follow it, track it, but informing what I love about Ben is the humility of, if there's a better way, he's agnostic. He doesn't have a dog in that fight. And he wouldn't be doing what I'm doing on this podcast, because he'll never talk badly about anyone. What I'm doing is I'm defending myself from the hive of minions that, are true believers. I'm talking true believers, like scary believers. Eric Tessie is scary. It's scary.
To be honest, I've had nothing but good interactions with the
good. Hey,
those guys myself, so I can't test to that.
Listen,
I have the opposite.
Helpful for some, harmful for others. If it's helpful, absorb what's useful and discard the rest. I'm just telling you what I know personally from seeing that guy, and I stay clear because he disparages me too. That's why.
I'm going to steer the conversation back to Ben and the ATG system. I thought it was really cool that you guys were doing some work together. Before I started this podcast with Will, I had spent about a year, give or take, in the ATG for Coaches system. I was working with Lucas Aaron back when the ATG system included him for about 6 months. And then I spent half a year doing the knees over toes specific programs. And developed a relationship with the co-owner Keegan Smith. And Keegan was actually one of our first podcast guests that we had on here. Lucas was our first, Keegan was our second. They were the two coaches that really helped and influenced me most. And one of the conversations that we had with Keegan that I found interesting was this idea behind prioritizing biomechanical patterning versus tissue conditioning. And obviously, Ben's system is creating an environment where you're conditioning your tissues. Obviously, he has had results in decreased knee pain and decreased, but the challenge that we've kind of had was, okay, are you locking your tissues and your patterning and your neurological patterning into this linear movement? You're using this linear movement to condition your tissues, and you're not doing some of that rotary movement. You're not doing as much three-dimensional movement to condition your tissues. What are the long-term effects on that? What do you think is the intersection between tissue conditioning and maybe neurologically patterning more efficient movement?
Yeah, a great question. And first, I want to say that I have learned profound things from Ben Patrick. So I'm forever grateful for him sort of highlighting certain things that I would not have, dove into had I not been inspired and informed by him. So that. Now, what I will say is that to the degree that the human body is this spiral dynamic, if you were to watch Ben run fast, and he can run with like NFL D-backs, he blew me up. We ran up a hill backward. He blew my doors off. Now I'm 52, but he blew my door. There's nothing I could do to catch him. If you were to actually watch him run prior to me saying anything, you would see some lateral deviation of his head, because that's sort of the natural way that it actually happens. Okay. And what I would say that Ben has really figured out is how to scale something to pain-free. So never work through the pain, just scale it back, scale it back, scale it back. And then it's the consistency, and the consistency through the fullest range of motion, according to how he's training, where there's a blood flow pump effect that he does. Most people don't understand that the sled was his foundation and is his foundation. And now what I'm doing every single day, I do Ben's sled workout. So I do 10 reps, pulling and pushing the sled, and I apply my head over foot, my defensive back. I put my knees, like I'm exploring the whole time. But when I'm pushing it, if I want to keep my head plumb neutral, what I'm doing is I'm pushing on a tightrope. Here, Allison Felix at 150 meters is running a tightrope. So her shoulders are doing this, but her head's in the middle because her head is over her foot if it's doing that. Okay. And the blood flow and the pump that you get combined with now this like fullest range of motion through the knee joint gives you a fortification that can't be had without those two combinations of the blood flow and then the pressure, right? And the synovial fluids. And think about inside your body, like what distinguishes the blood from the lymph? And like, does it like mix and does it sort of like, separate? And it's a big mystery if you go down to that cellular level of those capillaries. And so the whole body is just this fluid medium that creates pressure, right? Hydraulic pressure and the pneumatic regulator with the breath. And what I would say is that Ben's training is so valuable in this tissue development that if you were to do exactly what he said, I think you would be fine. I don't think it would compromise your motor patterns in normal. But I think if you do add the coiling rotational element to it and ropes and learn how to do that, you will only get more from his contribution. And I think he would agree with that, he's the first to give credit where credit is due. And he recently was on Mark Bell's podcast, Mark Bell. Yeah. And Mark Bell, because his knees were hurting him on a knees over toes squat, put a rubber band between the thing on the weight rack, and now he's got the rubber band. And okay, if I hold it out wide, it's easier. If I hold it here, it's harder. I could. It's just brilliant, but simple, right? And Ben was like, this is like the ultimate regression. And then we just had him in the lab, and we did the Nordic hamstring curl, which I was not doing prior to Ben. Like I didn't understand how significant that exercise is. And we did it on a Bosu ball. And for the first time ever, Ben went to full range of motion in the Nordic. Because if you're on a Nordic bench, the knee never extends to full. And Ben said that may be a major missing link, is that we've not explored full range of motion Nordics until the day he came in the lab here. So what I'm looking to do is I'm looking to form alliances with people who are facets on the beautiful gem that is movement training. So we take what's useful, absorb it, and discard the rest. And as we tic-tac our way forward, Ben also helped me appreciate the big toe. And so I was like, okay, well, I've always known it's important and it's the long side you transition, but I didn't have the same strategy in training it. And I've even, like, I'm an inventor, so I built insoles specifically to train my toes now. And if you jump a rope and you think toes rather than balls of feet, it's remarkably easier. Like, whoa. And I wasn't keenly aware of that. Because again, the toes, they're different than the hands. We've distinguished the feet. What do they do but support and transport, right? Some people are into feet. I'm not. Late at night, I'm not watching the feet ones. I can tell you that. But and I'm trying to put a little joke in there. But if you engage those toes, now you're getting linkage to up on the tibia and the fibula because the tips of the toes attach to long tendons that come up, and the tibia, right? The tibia comes down and it supports the inner ankle as well. And then it comes to the outside, 4 toes, right? It's the same muscle with 4 variant tendons. And then the big toe comes from the fibula, the outside, and it comes to the big toe. And it comes to the tips of those toes. So unless you have strength in the tips of the toes, well, now you're foregoing this huge opportunity to engage some of the longest tendons in your body. Think about where the long tendons are. They're elbows out, knees down. That's where the long tendons are. Otherwise than that, there's really not long tendons the same way that the extremities have the long tendons. And what I train is I train all the way down to the digits of my hands. Oh, God, that's a nice one. You, thank you for your practice. Thank you for your practice. Well,
He's got it.
A guy to follow on Instagram is Calvary Fitness. Ben Williams, Calvary Fitness. He has taken my hands and Weck method, and you combined it with his exploration and genius. He's now, I forgot how old he is. He's 30 something, and he is faster today than his athletic peak. And he does the ringing technique. So if you're going to pulse the arms and create downward force, here, if I do this gives me higher lift. You can test it yourself. Hold it neutral and lift your elbow is more restriction. You do that, it gets higher. So you get lift as you're carrying through the air on that leg. And when you come down and you snap the pulse to this extension, so it's the flexion extension, now you have an accelerant at the distal. Whereas if it's neutral, it's moving faster because it's distal, but relatively it's the same the whole time. So my fastest technique now is the ringing technique. And for distance running, we were talking about this crawling pattern and the overhand that I think is the right direction that this cult goes in, right? I think they're onto it, right? They do a lot of good stuff. I'm not trying to say everything's bad, and they're certainly helping some people, no question about it.
That's why we're unpacking it.
Amen. Exactly. Unpack it, right? Absorb what's useful. And maybe they have a contribution that is useful that, okay, well, that's a box that you should check. Maybe they do. I don't know. I haven't paid attention in a long time other than woke movement coaches and the clowns and what people send me, right? And generally I think there is some passive aggressive, like, okay, F you, right? You do it to me. So and I don't publicly defend myself. And what's nice about this is a micro niche of extremely biomechanical nerds whose influence has far more ripple effect than most people would understand. Because it is the nerds who are out front with a relentless pursuit of like more, better, let me understand it, who unlock the secrets that ultimately matriculate down to the conventional guys who learn sitting there at a PowerPoint presentation for 2 hours with zero practical, and then they go back and implement this for the little kid factories where they exploit the affluent suburban parents as they run the kids through the gauntlet, right? Because prior to all of this was the idea that we are seeing a massive spike in non-contact injuries in the NBA and football and everywhere. And could one of the causal factors be that everybody's bracing their core neutral and teaching you tall kneeling chops where you're not allowed to move your core, and I'm going to run, I'm going to throw, I'm going to kick, I'm going to hit, all with my spine neutral. Again, it's anathema to reality, right? Yet that's the dogma that's in the PowerPoint presentation, and it's just plain wrong. So we have that whole contingent, and that's the massive glacial sort of movement of, we have the science, we have peer-reviewed studies, right? You have the number one gait analysis professor in the world, down at SMU, will tell you that the time to reposition the limbs in the air is the same for all people. Man, go to a soccer game and watch the fast kid. He's turning them over faster than the kid who's not fast.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense. How did they come up with that? It
makes no sense, but you know why he says it and sticks with it? Because the only study that he does is in a laboratory on a treadmill where the relative speed of grandma running at 5 miles an hour is the same time to reposition her limbs as the track stars going 26 miles an hour. So you're telling me that they all reposition the limbs at the same time in locomotion? All you got to do is bring them outside, right? And do the real thing. Right? Why are we studying an abstraction? Because it costs a lot of money and it's a cool gadget. And I don't know first principle physics. You don't see the forest through the trees. I mean, it is preposterous that he's not tarred and feathered in the community. I mean, really, are you going to say that? Really? And then, a treadmill does not passively move your foot back. What? A motorized treadmill don't move your foot passively back? What the... So in the effort to inform the industry, I also came off so toxic. I was playing this character, Uncle Weck, and I was mean and I was nasty and I was a jerk off because I felt so violated about the abuse of my Bosu ball, which is just a tool, right? But yet, this intelligentsia and the peer-reviewed, oh, it's unstable, it makes you weaker, and it became the punching bag, and it cost me money. And it hurts ultimately people because it's a useful tool. Use it appropriately. And so I was furious, and I bit my tongue for like a decade on that shit, and I was fucking pissed. Now, okay, they got it coming, and ultimately they're going to be better for it. And, just as a Nordic hamstring accessory, the goddamn thing's worth it.
Well,
right?
I come from that world, and that's how I learned, right? Like, I'm there in school, and I'm like, they're giving me the best information, and it's summarized in paper, and that is the idea to go forward, right? Until, it was actually looking at FP that really started switching my mind, and then I found your work, and I'm like, oh, that coincides. I remember looking at Spinal Engine, and I was like, oh, wait a second, those two kind of coincide. And then I went back and looked at Spinal Engine after I worked with head over foot for a while. I'm like, oh, like I've been learning incorrectly this whole time, and actually training myself to be out of balance, making my nervous system.
And we wonder why there is an increase in non-contact injuries. If you have an industry hell bent on making people squeeze their core neutral at all costs, and the exercises in the gym are specifically tailored to, you're doing it wrong if you're side bending, right? We need core stability, right? It's just an untrue notion, because it's sort of like everything, like power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And what better way than commandeer science to rule, you don't have the science. Oh, okay. Well, I guess, my idea is not good because I can't empirically prove it with a peer-reviewed study amongst peers who don't understand first principles physics. And my propulsors, the propulsed speech, like, they are, yes, and that is a tool it's a box that when checked, you are fundamentally better. Like, now you instill the quality of like a Deion Sanders or a Randy Moss or a Lawrence Taylor, a Darryl Green, a Christian Coleman, because they apply downforce with their arms, right? Watch Justin Gatlin in mid-stroke, and his arms are here. He's not here. He's here, right? So it's shameful, the ignorance through ignorance, because the most powerful thing that I can do if I'm in the lead and it's my realm and my industry, the most powerful thing I can do is just ignore you, right? Because if I punch down, well, now I'm giving credence to this thing and I'm bringing awareness to it, right? So if I just ignore it and pretend that it doesn't exist, well, that preserves my position as sort of, the lead zeitgeist, right? The intellectual understanding of things it just sort of turns this stasis where it's like, oh, okay, right? And non-contact injuries, I would venture to guess that dogmatic approach to this brace your core to do everything under the sun, and the concomitant exercises and training that's gone on for years now, I personally would put the money in the center of the table to say that has had a negative influence on injury for the people who engaged in it, which was the majority of the top athletes, because they are trained by the ones with the certifications that bestow upon these people that they are in accord with the scientific understanding, and everything else is substandard.
Well, okay. That's where I came from. It's like I was teaching pull-up presses up until a couple of years ago, when I really, I'm like, okay, I can justify pull-off presses even now that I know head over foot, because it's keeping the core stable, and you need a little bit of stability to keep that head over foot, right? I was trying to justify it to myself over and over and over again, and then I'm like, wait a second, this is just not even how it's done. And when I found ropes and moving like I was thinking move infinity, like an infinity sign, passing the energy in a circular way, that's when it really unlocked. And then I can use the power of the pulse, like with my arms as like the next foot, to propel myself laterally better. Okay, so
yeah, and you know what's really interesting about the propulsors is up a hill or upstairs, it is faster and remarkably easier. Okay, and I've proved this with, well, I have examples. I don't have proof because it's not everybody yet, right? I have example after example after example. Hold on just 1 second.
Absolutely.
Hi there, can I call you back? Hi, can I call you back? Okay, I'll call you back as soon as I can. Okay, bye-bye. Okay.
Yeah. So this is really interesting because we've had whole episodes talking about, we should embrace the core as much as
No.
be able to
I think
the
here's where I come from now. Okay.
Okay.
I violated my own principles by saying you should never ever, you're totally wrong, blah blah blah. So what I'm saying is that both sides utilize, there may in fact be a time and a place for bracing your core and doing a Pallof press, right? I think I was, trying to sell my concept and also prove the fact that, like, if you're still doing a Pallof press, like, on week 2, like, what the hell are you doing? And you know what I mean? Like, it's a tool to get to the next thing. Like, you're not doing that for the rest of the routine. Otherwise, what the fuck are you doing? You're wasting your time, right? Because you're not doing something that would yield a greater result. And I came off as one-sided. And I'm not one-sided, and I recognize, okay, you don't want to poo-poo it because you find what utility there may in fact be. Now, that being said, somebody asked me, and it was a great question. He said, how would your training deal with someone who had spinal surgery where, 3 vertebrae were fused and they just couldn't side bend, right? And my answer to them in the moment, because it was just, okay, that's the question, here is the answer of what I would do, is I would have them begin with their hands, just doing this motion in the air, because that supination has coiled my lat to some degree, and this has lengthened it. So I create a short side and a long side and a short side and a long side. And as the articulation increases, so does the coil. So now we're giving the neural signal of the spinal engine, of that, reciprocity of rotation. And like you said, the harmonic of the continual circular motion, right? It doesn't end. This is another gripe I have with the conventional. They train decelerators in golf and baseball swings. We have to train the decelerators. What? At what point in time are you trying to slow down when you hit a golf club? The spiral dynamic unwinds the acceleration and it goes away. It dissipates. You're not getting a hot spot on some decelerator back here. I mean, it's wrong. Training the decelerators. Like, okay, if you need to train the decelerator for whatever reason, train the decelerator, but don't bring that into your golf swing. It's only going to mess you up.
So why wouldn't that? Why wouldn't that mess you up in, like, let's say a Nordic hamstring curl where you have to put that tension, you're decelerating with a eccentric movement? Why wouldn't that apply to running, where you have to let the connective tissue go and do its thing and let the muscle relax? As far as I'm concerned, that's how it goes. Do you have an answer to that at all?
Yeah, well, what's funny is I was of a mindset prior to that, it may have related to the shorter range of motion and not completing range of motion, but I was of a mindset that you could create an imbalance perhaps with the Nordic curl where you're training the knee hamstring less than the hip hamstring. And I used to view that the hip hamstring, because the ability of the hamstring to extend the hip, I was calling that like, okay, to extend the hip is my priority. I don't care as much about flexing the knee as I do about extending the hip, was my thinking. But the Nordic, especially to this fullest range of motion, creates such a strength that what it does is it bridges the hip extension with the knee flexion. And as soon as you're off the ground, the stimulus of force production goes away. And now, as long as it's flexible through full range of motion, it flicks through and you get a higher recovery. So it's actually a very, very good exercise done properly. And the problem with it is that the intensity of it is so great that most people can't even go a few inches before it's like, it's not controlled. So I'm a full believer in, rather than even doing just negative sets, that may come in time, but in the beginning, most people won't even be capable of that. I believe in assist the exercise with a band or with a strap or something, so that as I'm coming down, I can work as hard as I can possibly work given my immediate circumstance and my capacity right now, and still go through the full range of motion and put it on the boundary of you could do it and it's really hard. Figure out how to assist it so that you can do it, but it's really, really hard. And now I believe that it is, I do them now as well, and I'm getting better at them. But I mean, it's such a difficult exercise. It's so intimidating of an exercise, and it's not comfortable for a lot of people. Like you get on your kneecaps, and like a lot of people are just like, this hurts my kneecaps. You know, in the beginning anyway. So I would have thought that you could possibly increase the chance of injury doing that exercise in abundance, and perhaps not full range of motion. I think that was factored in without me consciously even realizing it. So I went from that thinking to now I believe it's an indispensable aspect, and I have a setup where I can put any strength elastic band to match anybody's present day capacity, where they can do that Ben Patrick full range of motion on day one and then work up from there.
Is there any concerns that it's... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, what I used to use to get that range of motion is I found that like the issue that I find with bands is that as you get into that range of motion, you're getting more help at the bottom, which obviously most people are weakest at the bottom anyway. So what I used to use, I put a dowel out in front that was something.
Yes.
And you would basically use your upper body to assist you, and you could kind of keep the tension a little bit more consistent than with a band. That's great. How I used to, that's how I, because when I was, like I said, I went through the ATG program. I did bends, I did multiple programs. I did the zero, I did the dense, and then I think I did the standards program, and I got up to the point where I could do the 5 Nordics, right? And one thing I did find about, even just doing 6 months of just ATG was that I was really springy, and I couldn't figure out why. It was like, because I'd just done a bunch of loaded flexibility work with Lucas Aaron with range of strength. And I was almost like getting into the splits, and I was still squatting close to 400 pounds while also being able to do the splits. It was really cool. From my, this was before I got into any locomotive patterns. The one thing that I'm kind of curious about is this development of power and this development of strength is still so linear and bilateral. And like, I don't know how far to take the said principle when it comes to training locomotion. Because right now, my personal goals are something that I've never been able to do, which is distance run. I was very, very overweight as a kid, and the way that I got into fitness was powerlifting, and then I got into CrossFit. I did a little bit of Ido Portal method stuff and gymnastics and blah, blah, blah. Everything that I've always done has been linear and with very, very low efficiency in my gait cycle. So in terms of the actual said principle, when I'm doing strength training or I'm doing this flexibility work, I'm doing this stuff, it's like if I'm going all in on doing like a really high neural output activity like a Nordic, am I conditioning my body to optimize for this linear sagittal plane, frontal plane movement, doing exercises like that? Should I have more specific things that are training the rotary motion in addition to it? Like, is it basically, in terms of patterning, is it doing some harm, even if from like a power output perspective, is it doing me good?
Fantastic question. First, I want to say that I would use that ab wheel that had like a wind up spring in it for my Nordics, right? Yeah. So I would be getting that, similar to holding onto a stick, which I've done as well, where, you're just getting the assist so that you can put the appropriate range of, you can get the maximum range of motion earlier than earning it through months of, not doing it, right? Now, very interesting question about this neural adaptation, principle of specificity. And I think, let me just say, principle of specificity, but when people would criticize the Bosu ball and say, well, you don't play on an unstable surface, why on earth would you train on an unstable surface? They don't understand the principle of specificity, because the principle of specificity is the specificity toward the training effect that you're trying to elicit, not the activity itself. Because otherwise you wouldn't do anything in the gym, because it's not specific to, the thing itself, right? So if you want to rag on the Bosu ball, well, start ragging on every other thing, because, the same rules apply. Now, how we address this sort of, we take movement training and we basically create this triangle and we say, okay, we have coiling core training as defined by the singular side training. And I didn't go into the brachiation part, but if I reach up as high as I possibly can on this side, as if I were hanging from a branch where I want the least amount of muscular shortening possible so that it's all connective tissue, I get the most economy and efficiency. And I also happen to bring the hand over the opposite foot is going to get me higher than trying to do the same foot. And so I'm coming here like that. And what it does, the higher you go up with it, Anthony, the higher you go up, the easier it is to drop down into a coil. And I get this, what I call verticalization effect that serves the fight and the flight. And so what we do is we define coiling core training that's unilateral, staying unilateral, optimizing your spinal engine coil spring to the maximum on each side separately. Then we have bilateral torsion training, which is basically defining this torsion and this sort of pronation, sort of what I call this sort of the cobra, where everything you're tucking under, you're coming here, and we call that internal torsion, bilateral. And then we have external torsion, which is the opposite, where we're coming here, and I call that raptor. So that now that's the that lordotic, and we match spine and shin angle. And then we have what we call rotational movement training, which is the combination of all that stuff. So that's the activity. And Chris Chamberlain, right? He used to be Savage Protocols on Instagram. Now he's just, underscore Christopher.Chamberlain _. And I highly recommend that you go check him out, because what he's done is he's helped me codify Weck method into a methodology with like specific objectives. And what he does to program, and what we do now based on his genius, is we define the ratios of coiling core training, bilateral torsion training, and then rotational movement training to create the greatest outcome from those individual parts. So there is a place for bilateral training. Okay, there's certainly a place for it, in my opinion. What you do with that, how we define it, is we define it down to, okay, which side are we on during which phase of the movement? So if we can understand how to use this internal torsion and external torsion, we can create even more powerful bilateral force, and then we can mix the torsion. So I can be long here and here, which would be coiling core, but then snap through on a rotational move that involved opposites of the bilateral. So this one will be internal, this one will be external, for example. So that's how we address it. Now, specifically to sort of the Nordic hamstring, would it create problems neurologically because you're doing it bilaterally? I think the answer to that would probably be no, in terms of, well, let's put it this way. I think you get far more benefit doing it than not doing it. And I don't think the risk is appreciable for the number of repetitions that you're going to be doing it, especially if it's concomitant to putting it into rotation. And the bilateral is really good for achieving maximum pressurization and maximum strength. So if we like to trap bar deadlift a lot. And now what we're doing is we're doing angled trap bar deadlifts where we're off the vertical, right? And so we're able to almost ski jumper. And, Chris will lift 500 pounds in that forward inclination, and he will define whether or not he's emphasizing bilateral or, internal or external torsion, depending upon the depth that he's going to go and the positioning of the feet. Because we do it on this Weck deck, which is just like giant soul steps. And it's a product that we're probably going to make. We're going to make it out of wood first, but it just takes the soul step. It gives you a lot of real estate. The soul step is just your footprint. So, we don't like to lift heavy on the soul step because, there's room for a little bit of a nudge and it can move. And then it's a big to-do. You might have to re-rack or whatever it is. But that would be my assessment, is that you're not going to really change a neural pattern from 4 sets of Nordics or 5 sets of Nordics doing even 10 reps. So you've done 50 repetitions. And Also on the Bosu ball with the Nordic, we get to squeeze the adductors. And squeezing the adductors allows us to get that combination of the adductor strength with the hamstring strength. And they work together. The adductors are the only group of muscle that flexes and extends the same joint. So you have biceps, which will do this and this, hamstrings, which will do this and this. But the adductors, they'll flex and they'll extend. And the reason why is because the femoral head and that acetabulum, the most efficient way is this figure eight. And it's a large group of muscles. So you're getting the flexion and the extension from the same muscle group. And the more fortified that is, the more pressure and buttressing that you have to the outside of the body. So center line is pivotal to understand. And then a stronger connection association to center line will buttress the periphery to have a more stable pressure at the center of it all. I said a lot. Hope it makes sense, and fire the questions.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. The only concern I would have is this is more of a question. If you pressurize, let's say on the Bosu ball, and you're pressurizing your adductors in, like how much are you doing of that? Is that just like a way to rev up the nervous system, or are you doing reps with that? Because in running, you wouldn't want your adductors to be coming in like this, if I'm correct there. What do you think about that?
The adductors is a figure eight when running. So in terms of the coming in, that will tend to be the pull through cycle, is that the knee will come sort of inward, you'll slice out, you'll come in. And, and so a lot of guys will have their heel come out as a result of the femur coming in slightly on that recovery. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. But isometrically, or is it elongating?
No. Well, here's what's great about the Bosu ball is that it's what I'll define it as expometric, because it's an elasticity under pressure where if I have a slingshot with 100 pounds of force and I have 100 pounds, the slingshot, it registers the same force, right? The fish scale is going to say exactly the same, but this is like a current of force that stimulates the nervous system to fire faster, bigger motor units. And so when we're creating that elastic, and it's limit force, so there is no range of motion in it to reach that peak force capacity. And so you're doing this, and it will fortify the lift, and it will give you the benefit of more explosive action to the center line. And just in martial ability, if I come at you like a tough guy, like, you want to fight? Well, then you just hit me here and I lose. But if I come in center and I'm able to, to block hitting the vulnerable spots, that's functional. So, and in sports, you'll see, and especially if you watch Usain Bolt come out of the blocks, this is probably the best example of that internal rotation to flex, and then outward to hit, and then internal to flex. And what that technique he did, or does so well, because he does it more severely than just about anybody else, is it took a guy who's 6'5" or 6'6" and allowed him to start with the guys who were 5'11", 5'10". Because the knock against Usain when he was a kid was, you got to run the 400, my man, because you ain't going to get out for the 100. You need extra meters to catch up to these guys. And what he did, another thing that Usain Bolt did, is he's a right-legged runner. He puts more force to the ground with the right leg. And there's now science, but when I was watching back in 2009, 2008, he was, if I go on the right and I recover on the left and on the right, I'm a right-footed runner. And Tyson Gay's the opposite. He's a left-footed runner. Most guys are left-footed runners because you'll tend to jump and touch the basket with your right hand. You jump off your left leg. You'll kick with your right leg. Your left leg is that stable plant, right? That's the tendency. But what Usain Bolt did that's different than the convention was he didn't line up in the blocks with his power leg in front. He put the power leg in back. So now he pulls it through with that massive internal rotation, spirals out to hit out. Green dot. Well, actually, it's starting. You're hitting big toe because you can't hit the green dot on the start because you need in that angle. Your way acceleration, the line. You need the long part of the foot doing it, and you're also out further as you come in, as you accelerate. But by putting the power leg, his right leg in the back, what he's able to do is he's able to now land his first step on the power leg, as opposed to landing the first step not on the power leg. And I believe in that. Like, if let's put it this way, I believe in whatever's faster. Okay, that's what I believe in. So, but I would believe that you should test it out. That if normally you want to line up because you preference like that front leg is my power off, I don't want to push so much as I want to explode and then hit the ground as fast as I possibly can. So that's just a sort of an aside as to the biomechanics of a Usain Bolt, that he would use that expression of the internal rotation to his advantage, to the point where if he didn't do that and he pulled the knee through straight, I think he'd be standing up too soon, and I don't think that he would have the capacity to compete with guys in 100. And his 9.58, the 9.58 that he ran, he started with everybody. He got a great start. So he was up with the pack, up with the Asafas, up with the Justin Gatlin in terms of the performance of that start. And Tyson Gay ran a 9.69, where at 30 meters, he was like a body length and a half behind, I think it was Asafa Powell. And then he cooked and he ran a 9.69. I think if you put a great start on Tyson Gay during that particular race, I think we might have seen a 9.58 or something similar or close or perhaps even better. So it's sprinting is a balancing act. And Usain Bolt, obviously the best to ever do it. But if you do look at the sprinters, the flexion is associated with the internal rotation, because that is the essential spiral dynamic of the body and the hip and the femur.
That is very interesting. What about positioning of the pelvis? So hip thrusters have become super popular. I feel like it's pushing the hips way too far ahead. The hips being back during a sprint seems more conducive to better mechanics. And as well, what do you think of where the pelvic tilt should be during locomotion? And is the priority whether it's shifted forward or whether it's tilted? What do you think about that?
Okay, so first of all, I'll say that human beings are same, but different. So there's not exactly one formula that will necessarily hold true for everybody. But you made a very insightful observation about sort of, having that overextension, because what happens is then you're not on top of yourself suddenly. You're opened up and you're ahead of yourself, and you can't climb back on top to be fast. And the one exception to this rule was Ben Johnson. Because when Ben Johnson did his, when he was running, he would jump out of the start. His hands were like this. So he's like this in the air. And his foot literally landed like this. Like a lizard running across the water. He didn't land like most guys are going to land on the inside here and go, right? So I come boom, boom, and the track shoe is extremely rigid, so you get more than what you could get by far barefoot. So the gear makes you faster. But Ben Johnson was so strong that he was able to pull himself back on top, and nobody else was as strong in that regard. So what I would say is about a sprint. Basically, what you would do is you would have in a tendency is in the beginning, you'll have more of sort of that lordotic pelvic tilt to anterior slightly in the beginning. And then as you come up and running, you'll get a little bit of that posterior tilt to give you more of a front side mechanic so that you can get to faster and maintain faster. So, and I would say that that's going to be your general tendency if you want to perform your best, is that would be the transition of the hips.
Okay.
So, guys, I'm going to put just a 5-minute warning
pelvis
for anyone who wanted to, who is watching live, who wanted to ask questions or they wanted to join. You can either hit the knock button to join the stream and ask David your questions directly, or you can type them in the chat now. This is really interesting because pelvic tilt during sprints. I just started doing a little bit more sprint training. I haven't done it in a very, very long time, and I haven't. I've thought about my position of my pelvis relative to my rib cage, in terms of I want it a little bit farther behind because I find I get that forward momentum a little bit better in that, hip behind rib cage cue. But the actual pelvic tilt, as I start to pick up speed, I haven't really thought about that as much. So you're saying you want more of a posterior tilt when you start picking up speed.
Try in your next sprint, and then let me know how it goes. Use that lordotic, what you're experiencing now, to get it up and going, and then try to transition. Don't do it extreme, but try to transition so that now the rib would come a little bit closer to the ASISs of the pelvis, and get that a little bit of tuck under so that you're taller at the top speed, and you have a front side mechanic. So if the pelvis is here, the leg doesn't go back as far, right? So I don't get stuck behind myself, and I'm taller in the run when I put that, right? So the lordotic, if you're just measuring yourself in height, the lordotic will tend to shorten you, and the kyphotic here will tend to lengthen you. And the front side mechanics cannot be overstated enough, that you have to be on the front side. And the fastest guys to 60 meters, they will tend to peter out between 60 and 100. So you got Christian Coleman, the world record holder in the 60, can't seem to win the 100 against a lot of guys who are faster for the duration of the 100. And now there's a Chinese runner who ran 100, and his split was to 60 was faster than Christian Coleman's world record. It was faster than Usain Bolt's world record to the 60-meter mark in that run. But by the time the end of the race comes, he's reeled in by the other guys who are, quote unquote, running taller and less turned out. So Christian Coleman has a severe turnout with his feet, that now you're sort of that pelvis is just a little bit ahead, like the hip thrust type of deal kind of thing, right? And so he's not on top of himself for the preservation of the speed that he's attained.
That was one other question that I was going to ask you about. What's your stance in terms of having your feet a little bit ducked out when you're in the either in the gait cycle or in posture or in general? What's the biomechanical consequences of having duck feet?
What I would say there is that the body, we are same but different. So if you look at like Walter Payton, he waddled, right, with his feet out, right? And he was so springy that he was forward in a foot, no consequence. Barry Sanders, another guy who had like that big turnout. Saquon Barkley, much more turnout. Those guys are so powerful that they're, again, able to stay on top of themselves despite the posture. Bo Jackson is probably the best example of a external runner who didn't do what, the cult says you got to do. And who's better than Bo Jackson? And by the way, Bo Jackson, I've actually heard it been said that, Bo Jackson was a fragile athlete because, he hurt himself. What? You're going to blame that injury on the fact that his feet were turned out? What about the 250-pound guy who yanked him and stopped him, and Bo's so strong that he hurt himself through strength due to an injury of a football player, not a non-contact injury? Like, it
was a contact injury, not a non-contact injury.
It was the epitome of a contact injury.
Yeah. The reason I was asking about that, so someone very, very close to me actually has like a wider set pelvis and also has FAI. So like a little bit of extra bone on the femoral head that pinches when they try to access internal rotation. And like,
so what is what's FAI? Femoral what?
Femoral acetabular impingement.
Impingement?
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. So like very, very high risk of labral tearing or pinching just because of that. And their feet are always ducked out and always set out. And, it causes problems up the chain because, knee issues, not so much ankle. Well, sometimes ankle issues, but mostly knee issues. And I've been trying to one of the reasons that I'm passionate about, trying to find, I want to help this person find answers for how they can get out of pain, right? That's sort of the ultimate thing. So that's kind of why I was asking about, biomechanically, if you're stuck in this duck-footed position, everything that you do is an external rotation, and can't access that internal rotation, can't access that forward foot thing that is supposed to fix everything naturally, can't access some of these quick biomechanical fixes that people say will fix everything, right? I'm just kind of curious in terms of like what that, like if it was the duck footedness that is causing some issues up the chain, or I'm still trying to find answers for them.
So very interesting. Now, first of all, I posted on a duck. Ducks run pigeon-toed. Okay, so somewhere ducks got a really bad rap because they don't walk like that. They walk like this, right? The inside claw on that whatever fin foot is actually on the inside. So that's ducks. Now, people are same but different. And the two best examples that I can give you for guys who exist out here, the best example on planet Earth is Chad Ocho Cinco. So Chad Johnson, the football player, the wide receiver, Ocho Cinco, kiss the baby. He's a funny guy, but he's literally Hall of Fame caliber, and he exists out here. And so does Terrell Owens. So Terrell Owens, and both of these receivers were, Hall of Fame caliber receivers, and they never got hurt, right? But they both exist here. So what that would indicate to me, like Walter Payton exists here, LeBron James exists here. And I have a theory on LeBron. I'll share it with you. But some of it is going to be dictated by your genetics, your makeup, right? Like some of it's going to be that. And to exist out here doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have the capacity to go here. So when you look at Chad Ochocinco, he just chills and he chillaxes here in life, but he can do this in the moment. And nobody had better feet than Chad Johnson. Like Chad Johnson's feet and his ability to cut and create separation, the best of all time as a wide receiver, in my opinion. So here's my theory on LeBron is ever since LeBron was very, very young, he was the standout, like second coming, like, his high school games had to be played in arenas where you could, put pro caliber crowds in because everybody needed to see him. You come into the NBA at what, like 18 years old or something? I mean, geez, Louise, that's amazing. And I think that there is a psychological aspect that if I'm the king, okay, if I'm the king, I don't need to be all crafty and guarded. I can be like, okay, right? Try it. You ain't even gonna try to hit me because I am the king, brother. So he's like big and open and just and then I'm talking deep psychology here. Whereas other men who are lesser men, which is most men on the planet, don't have that same degree of confidence. Like, the Tony Robbins idea, like, oh, you feel bad? Do this, right? Yeah, be open here, right? So I think if you're the king, because you're the best, then you do that. And I think if you're the best and you do that too much, well, now Michael Jordan's the best. And Michael Jordan.
I like Michael Jordan.
Okay, listen. You can have whatever opinion you want, but the right opinion is Michael Jordan.
I agree with LeBron, and I find the same thing. Growing up, you want to be wider, right? So you widen your stance and you make yourself look bigger. Now I'm more comfortable being in close with my feet, how they kind of want to be, right? With LeBron being so duck-footed, and it doesn't seem like he has access into his hips. He seems very rigid and very rigid in that duck stance. When the femur has to turn in during his run and his feet are turning out, is that not a concern for a tear at the knee?
Well, what I would say is that, again, and this is just an individual case that doesn't speak to the mean average or the whole, but LeBron has been incredibly robust. I mean, the guy's been in the league for 100 years, and he really had, he any injury that he has will tend to be some, he landed on some guy's foot and twisted his ankle type of a thing. It's not him just running and collapsing like so many of these other people was happening to, which I think, just given the scale and magnitude of training, is largely probably one of the causal factors was this idea that I have to brace everything, and I spend all my training time bracing, but that's not what I'm actually going to do. So again, I've created that little glitch, hitch of hesitation in the nervous system, and it doesn't know what to do because I've been training a certain way with enough reps that, like, okay, well, that's you're programming me to be blocky and clunky, right? So, and with the LeBron, I would say that, based on his personal injury history, I don't think it's problematic that his posture. I think also if you're there like that, you can play largely on the outside, right? And that outside, and then the transition to the inside, the weight is already gone by the time he gets to inside, so there's less consequence. But if you look at his big toes are like, especially on his left foot, his big toe is literally underneath his second toe. So he'd go big toe, third toe, because the second toe is on top on his foot. And what that does is that allows him to cut that inside angle without what you were talking about earlier, the burden of an extra appendage going longer that might get in the way of that transition. So, and if you look at the NBA players' feet, I mean, look at Shaquille O'Neal's feet. I mean, good God. I mean, you want a scary Halloween costume, be that, right? So there's a lot of these guys, and it's a performance thing because you don't want slack in your sneakers. When I played college football, I would buy 2 sizes too small, and then I'd get them wet, and I'd wear them for 2 weeks and stretch that leather because I didn't want any slack in the system. I don't want my foot. Some guys, Donnie Thompson in powerlifting, would spray Loctite on his feet so that he's in his shoe, right? The Loctite. I've done Loctite too, once I learned it from him. And when I have that, the tool, the shoe becomes part of my body. It's not this extra thing that it moves, I move. That's what I want when I play a sport. And I want to be able to knife the ground with the toes, and those shoes do it. And the track spikes. I mean, Jesus, you put those track spikes on. I mean, let's run this race because my feet are killing me. Think of a rock climber. That is the worst shoe other than Chinese foot binding. Rock climbing is the worst shoe that you could possibly put on because you need any distance is bad, right? And you need to be so locked in with it there. And so that's equipment and his gear. And I think for most people, you probably don't care about that added performance edge. So it's better to be, quote unquote, like more connected to the barefoot experience, because I think perhaps that might be better systemically for health. And there's energetics of the body. So there's there's Eastern philosophies that talk about the connection energetically of the meridians and the organs. And they're most sort of acute at the extremities, in the fingers and the toes. And it goes to the fingers and the toes. So that's a whole aspect that some people might, says, well, there's no science behind that. Well, I can happen to tell you, since I have a deep background in that, went to Chinese medical school, and I've been studying the Chinese arts for a long time, Taoist arts, where I can associate my Western anatomical biomechanical understanding, and I can understand, that's why my fourth finger does this, because I can't flip my fourth finger. I can do that, right? I can do that, but I sure can't do that. What's that mean? That means trying to do that funnels into my center. Isn't it interesting that in the acupuncture meridian chart, the fourth finger is the final one that comes up, and then it comes down and goes through the fourth toe, and then I'm done, and I come back up to the lungs. So there's a lot of, I'm looking for the result. And how I get there, there's paths to the center. And so whether I get there Eastern or Western, if I'm on the path, I still get to the center, if that makes sense. And once you understand that confluence of, we're getting to the same place, now you can compare and utilize the different paradigms and understanding that will lead you to even enhancing the Western and the Eastern aspect. Now, there's another aspect that is the esoteric, like, timeless time, mathematical irrationality, blah, 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 the stuff that, Mr. Whatever talks about, right? Spirals and blah, blah, blah. There's that aspect, and I have dug deeper into that. I've lost my mind 4 times, okay? And if I didn't have doctors, medication, family, and friends who were so loving and caring, I could literally be under a bridge on the 10 millionth digit of pi, sitting with my shopping cart. I was that spun out by the complexity and the mystery, and it was mathematics, that not the quantitative math, but the qualitative math. And there's something called vortex math. And basically what it is it's an exponential increase from 1, 2, 4, 8, 7, 5, instead of 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64. And so by having that, that's why they call it the vortex math, is because it just forms this figure 8, and the 3 and the 6 and the 9 are the polar changes. And the 9 is the all-encompassing all and no. And if you look at it relative to a circle, whether you're circumferentially dividing a circle, which is the 9 expressed on the outside, the all, to the nothing, which coming now to dividing the circle into divisions, that now it will fill in the circle. And so there's a whole aspect of that I have tapped into to understand, like, stuff that is, I may never be able to explain this stuff. And the 6 lines of intent, I was just huddled up with this amazing coach, Joel Rather, he was the editor of the NSCA publications for like 7 years. He was the strength coach of the year in like 2019. The guy is open-minded and informed. This guy knows a lot of stuff. And we sat down for several hours where I was trying to explain the 6 lines of intent and sort of equate them with the Western anatomical cueing or objectives. And he definitely does not have a full understanding. And it wasn't from a lack of trying to articulate it. So I'm the lucky mouse that fell into a bucket of cream with the invention of the Bosu ball. That was a grand slam home run that gave me the wherewithal to say, what day is it today? It don't matter. Ha, ha, ha. I'm going to be working on my stuff. And then it was THC. The THC for me was this incredible stimulant, incredible energizer, and incredible sensitivity. And I had the budget to spend, $1,000 to $3,000 a week for some years there, right? I was crazy. And I would not know what I know had I not had that capacity to personally feel so that I know. You cannot know something unless you feel it, right? If you don't know what orange juice is, well, there's no words. There's not enough words in the world for me to tell you what orange juice is. Just take a sip. Yeah. Now you know.
I just used the analogy with a friend today, saying try to explain purple to a person who's colorblind.
Yes, and say purple, taking a picture. Purple. you'll instead of
Well, I'd love to tap in a little bit more to these mathematical ideas. I'm actually very interested in that aspect of it, the Eastern, the Western. Maybe we could have you back on another show. That's been absolutely fantastic.
Yeah. Well, I would love to, and then I'll focus all on the positive rather than trying to, sort of set the record straight, which I apologize to the listeners out there if that was overbearing. And ultimately, frankly, honestly, God's honestly, what I'm looking for is, I guess, for lack of a better term, unification. We're all in the same team seeking to achieve the same objectives. So I'm no longer ranting and raving at the, brace your core neutral crowd. I want to be more inviting. I think it was a fundamental mistake on my part to come out as an asshole, but it was that, kid from Jersey, chip on my shoulder. You fucked with my Bosu ball now. Prepare to die. And I thought that the propulsors would be accepted as they should be. Keep in mind that the Fosbury flop was denied, ridiculed, vehemently opposed for 8 years. Okay. And now looking back on that, oh, really? What side were you on? Oh, no, I thought it was good the whole time. Because if you didn't, well, you have a lot to answer for, right? Cognitive dissonance, willful ignorance, one of the crowd, terrified to say the king ain't got clothes. Oh, really? Yes. So what I'm seeking is the reconciliation and ultimately the physical education is the fundamental education. In the world that we're living in now, the lies and corruption, deception, and just evil behind the shadows in the political, economical aspect of this world makes every fitness professional under the sun a fucking angel, okay? Like, We are talking about push-ups and squats and running around, and they're talking about, and the only hope for humanity, in my opinion, is be strong physically. If you're down on your luck, 5 eggs in the glass, drink it down before the sun, dun, 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 dun. And Sylvester Stallone, by the way, incredibly good running mechanics, okay? When he's running with Carl Weathers on the beach, okay, in Rocky 3, Carl Weathers is better, former NFL, and he's pulsing and head over foot in it, but so is Sylvester, and he does a damn good job of it. I think that incents us to do another one of these.
I'd say so. That was, we're just about 2 hours and 15 minutes, the longest Art of Move episode that we have done. Mind-boggling. It felt like much shorter than that. But David, thank you so much for coming on and sharing a lot of these perspectives. We would love to have you back on. When we were about to start, Will messaged me. He said, "Fuck, I think we could do 10 hours on this show and just, just go into it."
Hey,
and,
it worked for Joe Rogan, right? As long as, you see, for your audience, it's probably magnetic. And for your audience, some of them anyway, the beginning, they're probably sitting there having throwing shit at the screen probably because of what I was saying, right? But I ain't pulling punches on this one because I knew it would be an opportunity to address what needed to be addressed so that I can put it behind me.
I say let the best ideas win. Let's put the ideas in the ring and let them go.
That no better words have ever been spoken in the contest battle of ideas. Let the best ideas win, okay? And don't defend the ideas that aren't going to win to your own peril, because it's a short-term strategy where you feel good, but long-term you lose.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for contributing to this conversation, trying to find the grand unified theory of human movement and biomechanics. David, will definitely have you back on. For those who are listening on iTunes and Spotify, go check out the video replay on nofilter.net. All the screen share stuff and all the visual demonstrations add so much to this episode.
I'm ready to talk.
And we will catch you next time on The Art of Move. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, guys.
Have a good one.